Hello, and welcome to our October Books and Bites. So this month, we're going to be featuring some like spooky or scary kind of ghosty kind of stories to keep in theme with kind of October spooky season. So, Mr. Houchins, why don't you take it away for us?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start with, let's start with this one. This is Undead Girl Gang, which is just a fun title to begin with. But this follows Mila Flores, and she's a teen Wiccan at the school that she's in. And her friend Riley and these two mean girls that always kind of bully them suddenly just show up dead one day. Like they just find their bodies. And the police just rule that this was a suicide pact, that all three girls were just ruled as suicides. But Mila knows that there's no way Riley would have done that, especially with those two girls. They did not get along. They would not have had a pact like that. So Mila does the only thing she can think of. She brings the three girls back to life and makes them zombies so that she can figure out why they died and who killed them. The problem becomes the girls don't remember how they died. They have no memory of it whatsoever, but they do have unfinished business they need to take care of. And they only have 7 days to do it before the spells wears off and the girls go back to their graves. So Mila has 7 days to figure out who killed these girls while trying to wrangle a group of distracted teenage zombies. So it's got some horror elements and some silly elements to it. It's a really fun read.
It does sound really good. I've heard of it recently, so I might have to check that one out. So the first one I have is a twist on our traditional ghost story. It's called A Time for Andrew, a ghost story. And it's by Mary Downinghan, who writes some really great ghost stories, some of my favorite ones that I've read. And this is a story I read a really long time ago, but is one that I always remembered and thought about. And so we have Andrew and Drew. Andrew lives in 1910 and Drew lives in the present day. And they are cousins across time, right? And Drew dies in 1910 of diphtheria, except they meet one evening in the attic and decide to switch places so that Andrew won't actually die and will get help from modern medicine. And so then Andrew decides he doesn't want to go back to his time because he's worried that maybe he was really supposed to die. And so the boys kind of make a wager and have a marble game that they play. Whoever wins, if Andrew wins, he gets to stay in time, and if Drew wins, then they get to switch back. And so they're about their nightly meetings and their kind of time slip as they start to acclimate to the times that they're in. It's a bit of a suspense more so than kind of really scary. But it's a story that sticks with you. So I would recommend checking out A Time for Andrew.
That sounds great. And speaking of games, I'm going to go to this one that's also kind of about a game like that. And that's Doll Bones. And this one follows Zach, Poppy, and Alice, and they've been growing up together, and they've been playing this imaginary game like their entire childhood, where there's this world with pirates and thieves and mermaids, and the world is being ruled by this great queen, which is a bone china doll that's also kind of trapped in a cabinet and curses people. So as they're getting older and they get into middle school, Zach is being pressured by his father to stop being a little kid, stop having imaginary friends and imaginary games, and go try out for the basketball team. And he's just kind of being forced out of his childhood life. But as that's happening and as he leaves his friends, Poppy comes and says she's having dreams, these really bad dreams about the great queen, and that there's a ghost that is going to curse them if they don't return the China doll to this ghost's grave. So Poppy kind of pulls Zach and Alice back into this imaginary world, and they start questioning, is Poppy tricking them? Is this a real thing? Is the ghost real? Is this China doll just a China doll? And it's them going on this kind of adventure while also dealing with these ghosts and kind of creepy things as they're trying to figure out what this game might actually be about.
Yes. Right. So the next one that I have is called Elizabeth and Zenobia, and it is also about kind of imaginary friends. So Elizabeth and her father decide to go back to her father's childhood home after her mother just kind of runs out on them. And Elizabeth has this imaginary friend, Zenobia, who is the complete opposite of Elizabeth, who's pretty scared of almost everything. While Zenobia is likes things dark and dreary and loves the fog. And while they're at this new home, Elizabeth finds out that her father had a sister, but he won't talk about this sister who kind of disappeared. But he says kind of she's died when she was very young and won't talk about it. And they're not allowed to go into the East Wing, which, if you've seen any movies or anything, you know when you're not allowed to go somewhere. It's one, where you're going to go, and two, where you're going to find some really good adventures. So they find out that the sister was actually kind of taken by this plant king. And so they have to kind of unravel this mystery and kind of defeat the plant king to get the sister back. And so Elizabeth kind of has to face her fears. So it's about becoming brave and facing your fears while also having a little bit of adventure.
That sounds great. The next one I'm going to do is Skeleton Man. And this one is based on a Native American story that he actually kind of, one this author grew up with that he kind of retold, and it's about Molly. And Molly is telling the story and as it's happening. But she's suddenly found herself, her parents are missing. And she was sent to go live with a uncle, a great uncle that she's never met before. No one has ever mentioned before. He's a little weird. She's not sure what's going on, but we're telling this story that she finds her uncle reminds her of a story of the skeleton man that her father would tell her, of this man who was so hungry while he was in his lodge waiting for his family to go hunt. He was too lazy to go help hunt and find food. He burnt his finger. And as he pulled his finger to his mouth to help cool it off, he realized it tasted kind of good. And this man ends up eating himself entirely until he is just a skeleton, but his hunger is not satiated. He ends up eating his family as they return one by one until it's just his niece who cleverly escapes him. So Molly is having these dreams while she's living with this uncle who is very tall and very thin and very pale. And she's wondering if the dreams are actually trying to tell her something, but she can't understand them. So this is kind of her experiencing this story while also like reliving it, as she doesn't know what happened to her parents. They just disappeared, and this uncle who suddenly has taken her in and kind of keeps her locked up in a room every day. So it's a really good story. It's for those who are looking for a quick read. This is a very quick kind of that spooky story kind of read.
That does sound pretty good. So the next book I have is called The Lost Boy, and it's a graphic novel, and it is really kind of suspense filled. And it's about this boy, Nate, who moves into this new house, which you always have to be wary when you move somewhere new. And in the room that he decides to pick for himself, he finds under the floorboards an old, not quite a record player, but these like reels of tapes and a listening device for it, kind of like you would record like an audio on a really old tape. And so he starts listening to them, and as he starts listening to them, it's about this boy who is kind of searching the woods around the house because something is going on. And the boy is drawn in, and the neighbor, Carl, who has kind of studied the disappearance of the boy that made the recordings, comes along to help. And they kind of find this other dimension that's just on the other side of the woods. The woods kind of enter into this dimension and kingdom. So they have to search for the lost boy.
That sounds really good. The last book I've got for this Books and Bites is Dread Nation. And this is a story about Jane. Jane was born just a couple days before the Battle of Gettysburg in Pennsylvania during the Civil War. And just after that battle happened, the dead began to rise. And the rising horde of zombies basically just stopped the Civil War entirely, and a new nation was created, Dread Nation. And now, growing up in it, one of the things that she has to deal with is known as the Re Education Act, in which people of color must go be educated on combat and how to fight the undead. So Jane is at Miss Preston's School of Combat in Baltimore, where she's learning how to fight the undead. But her real focus is just go home back to her family in Kentucky. She's kind of ignoring everything that's going around her in the school, going around in Baltimore. She just wants to go home, but she's being forced to be at this combat school. But then some families start going missing in the Baltimore area, and Jane starts to kind of uncover some conspiracies and some nefarious plots going on in this world that maybe it's not the undead she needs to be worrying about. And for those who like this book, this one came out, I think, a year or two ago. A sequel to it just came out like 2 or 3 months ago. So there's, if you like it, you don't have to wait for the story to continue. It's already out there available. So this is kind of that retelling of what would happen if, during the Civil War, zombies showed up.
That sounds really good. And I do love sequels and when they're already out and you don't have to wait for it.
Oh yeah.
Really exciting. All right, so my last one and our last one for this evening is a bit of a legend. It's called The Night Gardener. And it is about these two orphans from Ireland who come to be servants in this house. And when they first get there, the lady of the house wants to send them away. She says, "This isn't a place for you. We don't need help. But the house is very dirty and they clearly do need some help." So she agrees to let them stay and let them clean and take care of the garden and everything. But they soon discover that in the evenings, someone with very muddy prints tends to walk the house. And there is this tree that grows they're not allowed to touch. So again, whenever you're not allowed to do something, you always know there is a story behind that. And so Molly and Kip, the brother and sister, have to figure out what is going on and what is haunting this house and this family, and their lives kind of start to come at risk as they get pulled into this house and the magic and mystery that's surrounded by it. So if you like a good legend and tall tale, then The Night Gardener is definitely for you. So thank you for watching this month's scary horror stories. Hopefully one of them has intrigued your interest, and you can check them out either from here at the CMS library or at Charleston Public Library.
Thank you for joining us.